The chosen one. The storm raged inside you long before the world noticed. It was not thunder that shook the ground, it was the silent tremor of your awakening. Somewhere between the ache of loss and the whisper of destiny, a voice called your name, not aloud, but in the secret chambers of your soul, where truth cannot lie. You were not abandoned. You were being summoned. You remember the silence of your childhood, that heavy stillness that pressed on your chest when others were held and you were left alone. You remember asking why the love that seemed to nurture others never reached you. And in that question lay the first spark of your calling. Because separation was not punishment, it was preparation. The divine chose isolation as your teacher, not to destroy your heart, but to forge it into something unbreakable. Every tear, every unanswered prayer, every cold gaze was not a denial, it was a design. You were being refined, not rejected. But how could you know then that the distance between you and your mother was not emotional failure, but sacred architecture, that every gap was a doorway through which only revelation could enter? When she withdrew, heaven drew near, and what you thought was absence was actually alignment. There were nights when you looked at the stars and asked if anyone saw you. The heavens did not speak, yet they watched. You mistook the silence for neglect, but silence is how eternity speaks when words are too small. In that silence, you were being trained to hear what others miss, the pulse of purpose beating beneath the noise of life. The chosen one does not learn in comfort, the chosen one learns in exile. And you, chosen by design, have walked that lonely path. You were separated, not for lack of love, but for abundance of destiny. For God does not plant greatness in crowded soil. He removes it, buries it alone, and lets it grow unseen until it breaks through with divine power. You once prayed for belonging, unaware that belonging was your greatest danger. You once begged for acceptance, unaware that acceptance could have destroyed your vision. So heaven, in mercy, withheld what you thought you needed to give you what your spirit required. You were never meant to be ordinary. The ache you carry is sacred evidence that your soul remembers its mission. And though your mind has doubted it, though your heart has bled for it, you are still standing not by luck, but by appointment. There will be moments when your faith trembles under the weight of unanswered questions. You will wonder if this calling is real, if the pain has meaning, if the silence will ever break. In those moments, remember, every chosen soul wrestles with the voice that called it. Every prophet has doubted his prophecy. Every warrior has feared the war he was born for. So yes, doubt will come, but so will destiny. The two are bound together like shadow and light. For faith is not the absence of fear, it is the decision to keep walking even when fear whispers louder than hope. You are the one who keeps walking. You are the one heaven set apart. And though you may not yet see it, every scar has a reason. Every silence has a message. Every distance has a direction. When others leaned on love, you learned to lean on strength. When others were protected, you were prepared. And now the season is shifting. The wilderness that once isolated you is opening. The pain that once buried you is beginning to bloom. It will not make sense to those around you. They will not understand how separation could become salvation. But you will. You already do. Because deep down, something inside you knows this was never random. You were called out of comfort to carry fire. You were chosen to walk alone so that others could find their way through your footprints. And even now, when doubt tries to drown the voice within, there is still a flicker, a pulse, a truth that refuses to die. That truth is your calling, and it is waiting for you to answer. If you feel this truth, hit like and subscribe. Write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign of your divine alignment, because this is only the beginning. And the next chapter, the one where revelation meets resistance, is about to unfold. The chosen one, the night did not fall by accident. It descended like a curtain drawn by unseen hands, and in that darkness, the truth you had long avoided began to whisper your name again. The same voice that once comforted you now demanded confrontation. It asked you to face the one thing you had buried deep, the wound that made you, the separation that defined you. You tried to silence it with logic, to reason your way out of the ache, but destiny cannot be reasoned with. It waits, patient and relentless, in the depths of your hesitation. And when you finally stop running, it speaks, not in thunder, but in quiet conviction. You were separated from your mother, not as punishment, but as prophecy. You were never meant to mirror her pain. You were meant to transcend it. And yet, the blood that tied you also chained you. Her voice sometimes cold, sometimes trembling with her own unresolved fears, became the echo that haunted your faith. There were days you could not tell if she was your test or your teacher. Every harsh word carved something in you. Every silence between you became an unspoken sermon. You wanted her to see you, to bless you, to understand your hunger for more. But instead, she misunderstood your light for rebellion, your courage for arrogance, your calling for madness. And that misunderstanding broke you. Because what child does not crave the warmth of recognition? What heart does not long for its first home, a mother's understanding? But sometimes, heaven must fracture the familiar, so that you can find your belonging elsewhere, in something infinite, not fragile. The pain of that division became your crucible, and though you thought it was injustice, it was divine arithmetic subtraction before multiplication. God had to remove before he could reveal. He had to empty you before he could fill you. You see, love that clings too tightly can suffocate purpose, and the mother who once held you could not hold the magnitude of who you were becoming. She was not your enemy, she was your first mirror, and even broken mirrors reflect the truth. Her rejection revealed your resilience. Her absence became the altar where your strength was born. Still, you wrestled with the question that burns through every chosen soul. Why me? Why must love hurt this deeply? Why must purpose come wrapped in pain? But the answer did not come in clarity. It came in contradiction, in moments where you felt both lost and found, broken and building, weakened, yet awakening. Your faith trembled in those days. You prayed without words, cried without sound, and still, the silence remained. But beneath that silence, the voice of destiny whispered again, "You are not forgotten. You are being fashioned." The world tells you to move on, to forgive and forget. But God tells you to remember, not to dwell, but to discern, to see the divine fingerprints in every fragment. Your suffering was not senseless. It was sculpted. Every scar was permission to rise. Every rejection was redirection toward your calling. The storm within you was not a breakdown. It was a breakthrough. And though it felt like the end, it was the middle of your becoming. Your isolation was the initiation, the place where heaven trains warriors, not with swords, but with silence. You were not meant to be tamed by the ordinary. That is why the ordinary could never hold you. Even now, as you listen to this, something inside you remembers who you are. Not who the world told you to be, not who your pain tried to convince you were, but who you were before you forgot. The one who carries divine fire in human flesh. So do not curse the separation. Do not resent the distance. It was the chisel that shaped your purpose. It was the void that made room for vision. For every time you were ignored, you learned to hear heaven more clearly. For every time you were dismissed, you discovered the strength of standing alone. The chosen one does not beg to belong. They rise to remember. They walk through the fire, not to prove their worth, but to reveal what cannot burn. And you, yes, you are walking proof that divine pain produces sacred power. You have been misunderstood? Yes, but so was every prophet who dared to speak truth to comfort. You have been rejected, but rejection was the only door that led you back to yourself. Now, the question is not why you were separated. It is what you will do with the strength it gave you. Will you stay bound to the pain, or will you rise into the promise? Will you let the wound define you, or will you let it remind you that you survived the fire and did not turn to ash? If you feel this truth, write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign of your divine alignment, because the next chapter is coming, and in it, you will face the reflection of your own faith, the moment when belief collides with betrayal and destiny demands your decision. The chosen one. The dawn broke differently this time. It did not arrive gently. It split the horizon like a blade. The light came not as comfort, but as confrontation, because revelation does not whisper to those who refuse to awaken. It shouts through the fractures, through the wounds that still pulse when touched. You thought the worst was behind you, that the silence had served its purpose, that the pain had finally subsided. But chosen ones rarely rest long in peace, because peace, for you, is not the absence of struggle. It is the battlefield where faith and fear collide. You began to rebuild your faith piece by fragile piece. You told yourself the worst was over, that the distance between you and your mother was finally understood, accepted, even healed. But healing is not a straight line. It twists, it returns, it reopens what you thought was closed. And suddenly, there she was again. Not in body perhaps, but in echo. Her words resurfaced like old ghosts, and they spoke to your deepest doubts. You felt the pull again, that inner conflict between honor and hurt. To honor her felt like betrayal to yourself. To let go of her felt like betrayal to God. And in that contradiction, your spirit trembled. You began to question everything you thought you knew about love, obedience, and faith. Is faith still faith when it hurts? Is obedience still holy when it breaks you? And if God truly set you apart, why must every blessing arrive disguised as burden? The questions haunted you, but heaven does not fear your questions. God would rather wrestle with an honest heart than be praised by a hollow one. So wrestle you did, with tears that did not stop, with prayers that turned into silence, and silence that turned into revelation. You began to see the pattern, how every loss was a ladder, how every confrontation was an invitation. Your mother's resistance was not punishment, it was prophecy. She could not see your wings because she had never learned to fly, and yet it was her gravity that taught you to lift. The very force that tried to keep you down became the wind that carried you higher. But even then, you struggled. The calling felt heavier than ever. The isolation that once purified you now threatened to consume you. You felt like you were carrying a mission you could not explain, a destiny too big to bear alone. There were nights when the same God who once whispered comfort now seemed impossibly distant. And you asked again, why me? Why this burden? Why this loneliness dressed as purpose? The answer came slowly, like the first light after a storm. Because chosen ones are not called to comfort, they are called to clarity. And clarity is costly. It demands the death of illusion, the loss of what once defined you, the courage to walk where there are no footprints. So you began to walk again, trembling, unsure, yet unwilling to turn back. Each step became a sermon, each breath an act of defiance against despair. And though no one around you understood, you began to feel the pulse of divine rhythm guiding your path. You started noticing signs, small, quiet confirmations that you were not alone. The number 3 appeared in strange places, a reminder of the divine triad: creation, destruction, rebirth. Every time doubt rose, a subtle synchronicity answered it. It was as if heaven was saying, yes, this is the path. Keep walking. You were learning that obedience is not always about agreement. Sometimes it is about surrender, the kind that feels like loss, but is really transformation. You were not being punished. You were being positioned. The silence was not absence. It was alignment. Then one day, you stood before a mirror and did not recognize yourself, not because you were lost, but because you had become someone your past could no longer contain. The pain had not disappeared, but it had been repurposed. The void had not been filled, but it had become fertile ground for vision. And for the first time, you understood your separation was sacred. This was the divine paradox. That isolation creates intimacy. That breaking becomes birthing. That losing what you love can awaken what you truly are. You began to see your mother differently, not as a source of pain, but as a mirror of lessons. She had played her role perfectly, even in her imperfection. Her silence shaped your voice. Her absence carved your faith. Her misunderstanding made you fluent in the language of divine purpose. And as you stood there breathing in this revelation, you realized that forgiveness is not about her. It is about your freedom. To forgive her was to release the anchor that kept you bound to a storm already past. To forgive was to reclaim your wings. So you whispered, not in anger, not in defeat, but in quiet power, I release you. And in releasing you, I rise. If you feel this truth, write 333 inches, the comments. It's a prophetic sign that your soul is awakening to divine freedom, because the next chapter will demand even more from you. The voice that once guided you will now test you. And faith, true faith, will require something greater than belief. It will require surrender. The chosen one. The sky was still, but your spirit was not. You felt it before you saw it. The quiet shift, the tightening of the air before revelation arrives. You had survived the storm, but now came something even greater, the stillness that tests what the storm revealed. It was no longer about endurance. It was about surrender, because the most dangerous part of faith is not when you are fighting, it is when you are waiting. When the battle outside ends, but the war within continues. When you have no more enemies to face, only yourself. And that is where heaven led you next, into the silence, where your soul could hear its own resistance. You thought the separation had made you strong, and it had, but strength without surrender becomes pride. So God began the next phase of your calling, breaking you not to destroy, but to rebuild in truth. He stripped away what even you had used to protect yourself, the armor you called faith, but was really fear in disguise. He revealed that much of your obedience was survival, not surrender, that your prayers, though sincere, were still negotiations, not release. You see, being chosen is not about being favored, it is about being refined. And refinement hurts. It is the process of fire removing the illusion that you are in control. You had learned to fight alone, but now heaven asked you to stop fighting altogether, to stand unarmed in the presence of purpose and trust that you would not be undone. That is the hardest lesson for those who have walked through abandonment, to believe that vulnerability is not death, because every wound in you whispers the same lie. If I let go, I will lose everything. But what if letting go is how you find what you were always meant to hold? So you stood there, trembling before destiny, and the whisper came again, this time not to command, but to confront. Will you trust me, even here? You did not answer at first, because trust is not born in victory, it is born in surrender. And surrender feels like falling without promise of landing. It feels like silence, where you once heard certainty. It feels like saying yes, when every scar screams no. The chosen one must walk through this. Every prophet before you has Moses in the desert, Elijah under the tree, Jesus in Gethsemane. Each one faced the silence of divine distance, not as punishment, but as proof of purpose. Because heaven never reveals full light until the soul has learned to see in the dark. So the darkness returned not the same, but deeper. It was no longer external. It lived inside, a shadow made of memory and fear, whispering that maybe this calling was an illusion, maybe all your faith was a mistake. You began to question if the voice that called you was ever real. You began to wonder if you had misunderstood everything. But here is the paradox. The deeper the doubt, the closer the destiny. Because doubt does not destroy faith, it refines it. True faith is not blind belief, it is sight that remains, even when the world goes dim. And in that dimness, something ancient awakened in you, a memory older than pain, a knowing that could not be erased by confusion. You remembered who you were before the world told you otherwise, not a child of abandonment, but a vessel of divine appointment, not a victim of silence, but the voice born from it. You remembered that you were chosen long before you were wounded, and no rejection, no misunderstanding, no distance could cancel what heaven decreed. Still, you wept. Because revelation does not erase the ache, it simply gives it purpose. You felt the weight of all you had carried, the unmet expectations, the love you wanted but never received, the validation you stopped chasing but still longed for. You realized that even strength can become a prison if it keeps you from feeling. So for the first time, you did not resist the tears. You let them fall freely, not as weakness, but as release. Because tears are not the opposite of faith, they are its evidence. They say, I still believe enough to feel. And that, dear soul, is the beginning of resurrection. You thought separation was your training, but now you understand surrender is your transformation. To rise higher, you must first kneel lower. To carry divine purpose, you must first let go of personal control. You must learn to trust that even your breaking is sacred, that even your silence is symphonic. And when you finally whispered, I trust you, the atmosphere shifted. The same stillness that once felt heavy now felt holy. You were no longer fighting God. You were flowing with Him. You realized that the calling is not about what you will do, but who you must become to carry it. In that moment, you felt something shift in your chest. The weight began to lift, not because the story had ended, but because you had changed your posture within it. You were no longer pleading for rescue. You were resting in revelation. If you feel this truth, write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign that your surrender is aligning with divine order. But remember, every surrender invites a new test. And in the next chapter, the cost of your obedience will come calling. The fire will return, not to destroy you, but to reveal the power that your surrender has unlocked. The chosen one. The air felt different that morning. It was too still, too deliberate, as though creation itself was waiting to see what you would do next. Because after surrender always comes testing. Heaven watches not with judgment, but with anticipation, to see whether the strength forged in silence can stand against the noise of the world. And so the test arrived, not as a storm this time, but as a whisper disguised as reason. It came through familiar voices, faces that once loved you, words that sounded comforting but carried chains beneath their sweetness. They said, "Come back, you've changed. You've gone too far." They smiled as they spoke, but their smiles carried the echo of the world that wanted you bound again. You hesitated, because even chosen ones crave belonging. Even prophets want to be understood. You wanted to believe that maybe this time they would see your light and not call it arrogance. Maybe they would hear your truth and not call it rebellion. But every time you tried to explain, their eyes glazed over, as though heaven's language had no translation in human speech. You realize then revelation isolates you again, not to punish you, but to preserve you. Because those who have not heard the call cannot walk beside it. They would rather tame what they do not understand than honor what they cannot contain. So you stood between two worlds, the comfort of what was and the calling of what could be. And this time, the silence asked for more than endurance. It asked for separation again, not from your mother now, but from everything and everyone that keeps you small. You wanted to resist. You wanted to hold on to what was familiar. But destiny does not bargain. It demands clean hands, an uncluttered heart. And so, one by one, the attachments began to fade. The people who could not see you started to walk away. The dreams that belonged to the old version of you began to crumble. At first, it felt like loss all over again. Then you began to understand. Heaven was making room. Every chosen one must walk through this valley, the valley of divine disconnection. It is the space where God removes the counterfeit so the authentic can appear. And though it hurts, though it feels like death, it is resurrection disguised as rejection. Because destiny cannot share a dwelling with distraction. You found yourself alone again, but this time, it felt different. The loneliness no longer screamed, it whispered. It spoke not of emptiness, but of evolution. You could feel your spirit expanding beyond the boundaries of what used to define you. And in that expansion came understanding. The same pain that once buried you was now becoming your platform. The same silence that once suffocated you was now your sanctuary. But then the crisis returned. Because growth never happens without resistance, you began to fear that you were deceiving yourself. Was this really God's will, or your own ego wearing His name? Had you mistaken separation for superiority? You feared you were drifting too far from what you once called home. And so you prayed not with words this time, but with desperation. You asked for a sign, a confirmation that this lonely path was still sacred. And it came, not through thunder, not through miracles, but through peace. A peace so heavy it silenced every voice inside you. The peace that surpasses understanding, the one that does not make sense, the kind that sits inside the storm and still says, "You are safe." That was your sign. Because peace is not the absence of conflict, it is the presence of clarity. In that peace, you remembered the first whisper, the one that called you when you were broken, unseen, forgotten, the one that told you separation was preparation. It was still speaking, unchanged by time, unshaken by fear. You realized then that destiny is not a single event. It is a continual unfolding, revelation after revelation, loss after loss, rebirth after rebirth. And you were still in it. The next morning, you looked at yourself again. The mirror no longer felt like judgment. You saw strength in your scars, wisdom in your weariness, beauty in your becoming. You had not been abandoned. You had been advanced. Every tear was tuition. Every heartbreak, holy instruction. Every separation, sacred schooling for the soul. The chosen one always pays a price others cannot afford. Because the reward is something others cannot receive. It is not fame, not power, not validation. It is revelation, the understanding that everything was necessary, that every loss was love in disguise, that every closed door was divine protection wearing human confusion. You have crossed through pain and come out with purpose, but purpose comes with a crown, and crowns are heavy. So now heaven tests your posture. Will you carry your purpose with humility, or use it for validation? Will you walk in your truth quietly, or demand that others see it? Will you keep walking, even when applause turns to silence again? Because that is the true test, not whether you can rise, but whether you can remain faithful when rising no longer feels rewarding. So breathe. You have not come this far to fall back. You have not endured this fire to live as ash. This is not the end of your becoming. It is the proving ground of your transformation. If you feel this truth, write 333 inches the comments. It's a prophetic sign that your preparation is nearly complete. Because the next chapter, the final revelation, will demand everything you've learned. The call will come again, not as comfort, but as command. And in that moment, you will finally understand why you were chosen. The chosen one. The wind was still, Yet the world around you seemed to hold its breath. You could feel it, that familiar vibration in the air, that quiet stirring that always comes before divine revelation. It wasn't loud this time, it wasn't wrapped in drama or thunder. It was steady, certain, a voice that no longer shouted from the heavens, but spoke from within you. You had walked through the wilderness, endured the silence, surrendered the control, and survived the fire. And now, here you stood, not the same person who once questioned why the separation happened, but someone transformed by the very thing that once broke you. This was not the end of your story. It was the unveiling of who you were always meant to be. For years, you thought being chosen meant being favored. You thought it meant being protected from pain, shielded from the storm, exempt from the loneliness that others feared. But now you know, being chosen means being entrusted with the kind of suffering that awakens worlds. It means carrying light through darkness, walking into places others avoid, and still believing that purpose is hidden even in pain. You remember the nights when you thought you wouldn't make it, the nights when the silence felt heavier than your own breath, when the ache of your mother's distance burned deeper than words could express. Those nights were not wasted. They were wombs of transformation. God was not punishing you. He was purifying you, teaching you to hear His voice above every other, to find His presence in what felt like abandonment, to become the kind of soul that does not crumble when the light flickers. The chosen one does not run from the shadow. They walk through it, and as you walked, something sacred happened. You began to see that what you lost was never truly yours to keep, and what you gained could never be taken. You stopped searching for closure and started walking in clarity. You realized that the love you longed for was never missing. It had been waiting in the space between your surrender and your awakening. And when you finally released the need for answers, the answers came. They didn't arrive as explanations, but as understanding, a knowing that everything, even the pain, had been necessary. Because without it, your wings would have never formed. Without it, you would still be trying to belong to a place that was never built for your becoming. You were not separated to be lonely. You were separated to become holy, to remember that divine purpose requires divine distance. Every rejection was redirection. Every silence was strategy. Every ending was an initiation into something greater. You see it now. You feel it now. The design that once felt cruel now feels clear. The hands that once felt distant were always guiding you. The world will not understand this transformation. They will see your calm and call it detachment. They will see your peace and mistake it for pride. They will ask how you can love those who hurt you and not demand apology. They will not understand that forgiveness is not weakness, it is freedom. That you honor your mother not because she healed you, but because you have become the healer. You no longer carry the wound, you carry the wisdom. There will come a day, very soon, when the same people who questioned your path will seek your guidance. They will not recognize you at first, for the fire has changed your countenance, the silence has deepened your voice, and the surrender has clothed you in light. You will not need to explain yourself. Your presence will speak. Because true power does not announce itself, it emanates. The chosen one rises not to be worshipped, but to awaken others. Your story, the separation, the struggle, the surrender, was never just for you. It was a map for those still wandering through their own wilderness. And when they see your calm amid chaos, your faith amid confusion, your grace amid rejection, they will know that their pain too has purpose. This is your anointing, not a crown of gold, but a spirit of endurance, not a throne, but a torch. You are called to carry light into places where hope has dimmed. You are called to remind the broken that their story is still sacred, that every ending hides an awakening. So when you speak now, speak as one who has walked through fire and learned that flames do not destroy truth, they reveal it. When you love now, love as one who understands that compassion is the highest form of strength. When you walk now, walk as one who knows that destiny is not ahead of you, it is within you. Your mother was not the end of your story. She was the beginning of your awakening. Her silence was the sound that taught you to hear God. Her absence was the emptiness where revelation bloomed. And now, through your healing, her spirit too is being redeemed. For in the realm of the divine, even pain is never wasted. Look around you. The storm is gone. The silence no longer frightens you. You have not just survived, you have been sanctified. The very pain that once defined you has now become your proof of purpose. You are the embodiment of the truth. That separation births revelation. That isolation prepares transformation. That faith is not certainty, but endurance. If you feel this truth, Write 333 inches the comments. It is the sign of divine completion, the number of alignment between heaven and earth, because your journey is no longer about survival. It is about service. You have become the vessel through which others will find their own awakening. You are not just the chosen one. You are the awakened one, the one who stood in the storm, surrendered to the silence, and rose with fire in your breath and peace in your eyes. This is your divine moment, not the end of the story, but the beginning of your legacy.